All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today for our speaker series with Jennifer Dirking. To introduce her, though, I'm going to bring up Jessica Move, who is a laboratory employee, and she's going to share a little bit more about Jennifer.
Hi, it's my pleasure to to introduce Jennifer Dirkin. She's the chair of the Wildflower Ambassador for Santa Clara County of the California Native Plant Society, and she managed the Native Plant Resource Team Pollinator Group. She's here to show us how benefit of creating California plant garden and how easy to create one. Please welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. And it was by Jessica's invitation that I came, and Weeks' tremendous help. It's such a welcoming environment here. This is my first time at the lab, and I was amazed just, how seamless everything's been. So thanks for welcoming me. I have to share, I was an organic gardener for 40 years before I discovered California natives. I had no idea. I'd missed the memo that the native plants are the only ones that co-evolved with the insects and the animals here. And so I've really become a big native plant proponent. But even if you don't grow native plants in your garden, you're a native gardener now. If you took some of these seeds, these are native California wildflowers that actually attract pollinators. If you're growing vegetables, they're going to boost your pollination rates. And we'll look at some of the data behind that. But this is mostly a talk that's focused on sort of people who are new to native gardening or trying to create pollinator gardens. And I do have to tell you, this is my biggest slide deck. I have 60 slides, 45 minutes. I'm going to talk a little fast, but the whole slide deck is going to be posted. There's a QR code at the end and also a link to all the slides. So for you note takers out there, go ahead and take notes, but it's all covered here. You can watch it later, they're recording it, or access it later. So as we think about creating a pollinator paradise in your own garden, we're going to start with looking at a few basic questions. What is a pollinator? Why does it matter? Why is this important? What is the key to their survival? They're under threat right now. How can we create a garden where they can flourish? What kind of elements do we need to have? What is pollination? An insect comes to the plant to drink nectar. They eat pollen for protein often, or bees will collect pollen to take back to the nest for their young. And they carry the pollen from plant to plant. The hairier the insect, I say hairy, but some of them have more of an area that pollen can connect to, so they are more efficient pollinators. And then basically the pollen lands on the stigma and goes down, connects with an egg, forms a seed, forms a fruit, and that feeds basically all of us, feeds all the ecosystems. Even the things that we don't eat, somebody eats it, and that's important. It's the whole food web is really important. I'm going to keep going until I'm told not to. So I start with an economic impact, because a lot of people are keenly aware of that. But the 105 most widely pollinated food crops are worth $800 billion a year or more globally. I'm sure that number has gone up since this was published. But we wouldn't have most of the seeds and fruits and things that we rely on for our survival if we did rely on insects to pollinate them. And so we really want to get more and more insects into our gardens. And it's really these services that these insects provide. They talk about, well, we can create a robot insect. We can do these other methods. Nothing is as efficient as the actual native natural pollinators. Some plants like oaks or corn are wind pollinated, but we wouldn't survive just on those wind pollinated foods. So if the pollinator population crashes, then other life forms will follow. So we need them to survive. So I'm going to really quickly go through this list. We have non-insect pollinators such as bats or hummingbirds. You'll sometimes see them with pollen on their beak. And then we have flies, butterflies, moths, beetles, wasps, and bees. And so I'm going to really quickly go through these various ones. I was not aware we have so many, I think it's 13 species of bats right here in the Bay Area. And this is the map from iNaturalist of where the sightings have been with these various bats. And so these bats are pollinators. They're a lot of them are going out at night, and they're pollinating things that are night blooming but they're also eating insects. They're great pest control. So I just bring them up as they're not a big pollinator, but they are part of the ecosystem. Hummingbirds as well, they're out nectaring on various plants. I want to point out the pollen sticks to their beaks, and that's how they plants. They also eat primarily insects. 80% of their diet is insects. And so they've shown studies where there was no nectar available in maybe a winter situation, and they still survived on insects, and they need the insects to feed their babies. So definitely you want a very buggy yard. If you see aphids in your garden, leave them, and hopefully the predators, it will come along and start eating them. So it was working. This is just a chart really quickly to show that besides bees, I put bees aside, but hoverflies, blowflies, ants, different types of butterflies, wasps, and ladybugs, all of them are part of this pollinator ecosystem. And they come to the plants, like I said, for a variety of reasons. They might be eating pests, they might be laying eggs, but they're transferring the pollen around as they're moving. And multiple insects will visit multiple plants. And so it's not just a 1-to-1 sort of ratio. And there's also some that are so specialized that if we did not have a chocolate midge fly pollinating the chocolate plants, the flowers, then we would not have chocolate. So, being aware that we need to look after all of our pollinators. So there are 16,000 species of flies in North America. If you know anyone who wants a good science project for their high school or hobby, that's a great place to study. They're the second most effective pollinators. They're super fast. They move from plant to plant more quickly than bees. And I mentioned the chocolate midge. I like chocolate, obviously. And they can travel further because they're not tied to a nest. Once they lay their eggs and those hatch, they move on, whereas bees create food for their young and nurture them. So I like to include some links. So if you want a really interesting lecture about this, actually my favorite is at the bottom here. Damon Teague does a really great lecture about fly pollinators. And they're being used commercially now. So you're getting more and more of that. The imported European honeybee is disease prone, and because of the hive situation, disease spreads, but we do have flies as another way to go. Butterflies are another pollinator, and they use their proboscis, their long tongue, to probe into flowers and nectar, and the pads on their feet actually serve as a way for them to taste a plant. When they land on it, they can tell, oh, this is milkweed, I'm going to lay my eggs here. They can sense that. And a lot of people are aware of the monarchs and their life cycle, but what they don't think about is we have thousands and thousands of other Lepidoptera, butterflies and moths that also are like the monarch, are relying on specific plants for their survival. Moths also they co-evolve with the native plants. They're more active at night. There are 19 times as many moth species as there are butterflies. They're more prevalent. And according to one of my favorite authors, Doug Tallamy, who's an entomologist at the University of Delaware, he says that moths actually taste better than butterflies, not because he ate them, but because butterflies have adapted to fly during the day. They can get away with it. They're not as tasty. The moths actually are a better meal for the baby birds. So I'm excited that in my garden, I actually have a very high number of moths. So another pollinator, beetles, they have the longest history of pollinating plants. So if you look at the evolutionary scale of these various insects, 200 million years they've been here and pollinating the various plants. They move a little more slowly. Some of the beetles are pests and will actually eat the plant. Sometimes, hopefully not all of it, they may lay their eggs, and their eggs will hatch as larvae that will attack pests to your garden. So my philosophy in gardening is to just try to create a very healthy ecosystem and let nature work out the bugs, so to speak. I'm just pointing out these two beetles here. We all love the ladybugs. Ladybugs don't carry a lot of pollen on their body, though, so not great pollinators, but they are great predators. They're great beneficial insects in the garden. The soldier beetle has a little bit more, you can see in this close-up, he has a little bit more texture on his shell, and he carries more pollen from plant to plant. And they're doing some experiments now. So they're taking they're planting native plant. This is native deergrass, ceanothus. I'm not quite sure that tree in the middle. all native plants along this crop, and they're counting the types of insects that show up. And this study is a link right here. So when you get the slides, you can click to it. But what they found was all of these beneficial insects, this huge list of beneficial insects, were all keeping those pest insects, like the 3 or 4 at the bottom, under control. And the crops were boosted and people had a better overall outcome. So pollinators are also wasps. I know we all want to hiss at this point in the slide deck because we've probably all been at least harassed by picnic, but they're really important pollinators, and they actually are predators as well. And so some of the pests that we don't want in our yard, they help to control that. And then we have some introduced pollinators. And so the most famous is the European honeybee. It was brought over here in the 1600s. The Europeans wanted to have wax and honey, but it's proved problematic in that these bees are susceptible to the varroa virus and mites. And now there's a new mite that's spreading across Europe that they would be susceptible to. Living in the hives, the crowded conditions, it makes it easier for that to spread. And it's interesting, I realized they're regulated as cattle by the USDA, whereas the Forest Service, et cetera, regulates the natural bees. So I just thought that was an interesting fact. These are really skilled at collecting pollen from your plants and taking it back to their hive, and so not transferring as much between the plants. They still do pollinate, but not as effectively as some of the native bees do, as you'll see in a second. And they compete with the native bees for resources. So I love honey. I'm not saying anything against native bees. I mean the imported bees, but these are some considerations. So the native bees co-evolved with the plants. So they all have specialized relationships with the plants. They're diverse. We have 1,600 species of bees in California, one of the largest bee diversity places in the world, actually. And they're often more efficient. They often have maybe a little more hair that the pollen sticks to. They're not taking as much pollen back to a hive. I'll show you in a moment how they live. And many of them are threatened. So some of our native bumblebees in the United States are going extinct as we speak. We are in the middle of the 6th extinction. And so we're seeing a lot of populations dip, but we can bring them back by planting the plants that they need. I just have to point out, we'll get to some of these individual bees, but in the lower right, the first time I saw a little circle cut out on one of my redbud leaves, I thought, oh no, what's going on? You think in terms of, quote, damage. And it was a leafcutter bee taking leaves to build its nest. And that's a sign of a successful ecosystem. And I was really excited to see, I don't care that there's little half moon shapes in my leaves. I have a healthy ecosystem and I have a great pollinator in my garden. So just to go highlight a few of these, the native bees, the bumblebees, they evolved this ability to buzz pollinate. So when you have something like blueberries, or in this case, this is a manzanita at the top and a blueberry at the bottom, very similar type of shaped flower, they get under there and they are able to kind of disengage their wings in a way and buzz them to like a mid-C note, and the pollen releases onto their bodies and they go on and they go from plant to plant. Honeybees are much less effective than the bumblebees at pollinating. And so I think they concluded in one of the studies I cite here that they could boost production of crops like a blueberry by 36%. So the studies are here and some interesting research by Xerces Society. So I recommend that. Carpenter bees. People say, oh no, something's drilling a hole in my wood over here. If you put wood out in your yard, maybe just a piece of a log or something, they can go burrow into that. They can build their nest there. But they're one of those species that's called sexually dimorphous. The male up above is fuzzy and golden, does not have a stinger. You see pictures on iNaturalist of people holding them in their hand, very, very beautiful and gentle. And then below is the female, and they gravitate toward plants that are like nightshade family plants. They have a wide variety of plants that they pollinate, but this is a native nightshade that she's pollinating, but it looks very much probably, if you have tomatoes or eggplants or things like that in your yard, very similar flowers. So I would say grow the native nightshade, grow your tomatoes, attract the bees, and create a nice environment for them. Here's the leaf cutter again. And this one below that was taken in Palo Alto, this is a petal cutter. And so she takes the petals and makes a little lining for her nest and lays her eggs in her nest. Our native bees are nesting, and we'll get to this in a second, but in the ground or in wood or in hollow stems. So more information about that is here. The mason bees and orchard bees, you probably heard more about these because these are being used more commercially now. So if you have fruit trees, you have literally an orchard, then they are a really good addition to that. They don't go very far from their nest. And so if somebody is bringing mason bees and getting them set up on their land, they're going to stick around closer than, say, a honeybee might travel a little further, or a bumblebee might travel further. And then I mentioned earlier the hedgerows. This is a old practice in Europe of creating those native plant buffers around your crops or your area to boost the populations of these. And I just have to throw in the squash bee. Not that it's something you're going to see every day, but they're really adorable, and they've been here forever. And if the males will actually sleep in the flower at night, and the flower closes and they're inside there. They don't go back to a nest like the female does. And if you shake the flower, you can tell if they're in there because there's a little buzz inside. They make a little noise. But anyway, that's really, there's amazing variety of bees. I'm just showing you really briefly here the types of nests they have. They nest in the ground. Here's what it looks like when they nest in wood. And there's even ones that mimic each other. So the one in the upper right is mimicking a bumblebee, and it's actually a digger bee. So it's, kind of an interesting, some interesting adaptations that they have. Anyway, there's a nice, actually short film about my garden of 1,000 bees on PBS. So that's a link to that. And then this is another, I love this lower image where it shows what the leafcutter does when she builds her nest. She lines the nest with those leaves, and then she lays one egg with a little pack of pollen, and then she seals that off, and then she lays another egg with another pollen ball, and she does those one by one by one. You can see in the middle how the resin bee, because that's using a different material to make its nest, that's what they look like when they hatch. So those are baby bees. And then at the very bottom, we have a mud, I believe that's a mud mason bee, sorry. So they use mud to build their nests. So it's just kind of interesting to see. And going on about bee diversity, this is just at Pinnacles. Pinnacles Park is one of the most bee diverse places in our state, which is the most bee diverse place in the U.S. and probably the world. So if you get really excited about this, that's a great place to go camping. Not in the summer when it's really hot, but anyway, you'll see a lot of bee diversity there. But all of this is under threat. So we have a dramatic decline in insects. We've lost 41% within the last decade. That trajectory, if that trajectory does not get reversed, this is going to be a serious issue for humans, not just for the insects. This is getting news. It's getting covered in the New York Times. It's getting covered in National Geographic. And Dr. Doug Talamy, whom I referenced earlier, he said that at the current rate of decline, we have about 16 years to try to turn this around before we reach a point of no return where we don't have enough pollinators to sustain human life. So I know that sounds really dire. I hate to go dark, but I'd like to also instill some hope, because this is something I learned only 4 years ago, and a light bulb went off for me, and it changed a lot about how I garden. So, just quickly looking at the causes, I've touched on some of them, but we have incredible development. We're building on the land at an alarming rate, and that is taking away habitat. We have introduced plant species. If you just drive down the road, you see all the not native plants. Those are all not feeding the ecosystem. The way that we do agriculture, I showed you earlier a crop with a hedgerow. Here's what the Central Valley typically looks like. It's just vast tracts of one type of crop, probably sprayed with herbicides to kill everything before they plant, and then sprayed again to kill everything that might eat it. So it's a very chemical intensive style of handling the earth. And those are things that I don't use. I've never used those in my garden. If I had a really bad pest problem, I've ran into that with broccoli once. I tore that out and planted something else because I don't want to ingest the chemicals myself. And then we've seen these seasonal shifts in the weather. Things It might be rainy at a strange time of year, or we have way more fires than we've ever had in California. And so those things can also impact the insects. When the plants bloom, it impacts the insects. So we can feel, I got pretty depressed once I learned all of this, but again, the talk that I heard was actually from Doug Tallamy. I'm just going to hold up his book because this was so inspiring to me. And you can, if you don't want to read the whole book, you can just listen to one of his lectures. But he's very engaging, and he really makes the case for how we can have hope about the future. So, this was me a couple of years ago going, wait, what's wrong with my pretty English garden? This is not my garden, but I had all these plants in my garden. I had the delphiniums, and I had the centranthus, the Jupiter's beard, and I had the peonies. And the insects would come visit my garden. And it never really occurred to me to look. I never looked closely. Are there caterpillars on my plants? Are there bees nesting in the ground? No, because the butterflies and other insects, they go to a garden like that, and it's like a bar. They can go sip on the nectar and they can get a little bit of pollen, but it's not a restaurant. They can't feed their young. There's no leaves for the caterpillars to eat. And so, just like the milkweed and the monarch have that symbiotic relationship. The caterpillars need to eat the leaves of the native plants that they co-evolved with. And there's a few exceptions, like an anise swallowtail will eat dill or fennel. That's probably like 1 in 200 of the butterflies have that kind of, there's a plant that is close enough for them. So we need to really bump up the number of native plants that we're growing in order to have more of them. Again, I cite Doug Tallamy. We can either be working with nature or we can be working against it, and we can prevent life in our gardens. So just to get a visual on that, to the left, all of the green are the plants that feed the most caterpillars, that feed the most birds, that boost they are the foundation of the food web. And we have oak, hollyleaf cherry, currant, lilac, maple, California rose, lupin, manzanita, sage, goldenrod. These are all of the native versions of these plants. And then all the little red puddles to the right are like acacia, cotoneaster, eucalyptus, forget-me-nots, fennels, ivy, all of these plants that we grow that you can see they don't have much impact at all on the ecosystem, not much positive at all. And if you want to see a full list, there's a link here to that. To the left of the oak, actually the very biggest is willow. So for those of you who raised your hand and said damp spot, if you have room for a willow, plant it. It feeds more, but we often don't promote willow because people would plant them probably in a dry, hot spot. They wouldn't make it. But willow is also another important one. So what are the native plants? Well, here's just a whole variety that feed a high number of bees. And the reason I put these all on one slide is I have quite a few slides about plants, and I want to go through it quickly, but you could build a really nice pollinator garden just from the plants that are on here. Any type, the California sunflower feeds 100 bee species. The mock heather feeds 93. Grindalia or gumweed, which is in the seed mix that everyone here has, that will grow 84 different bee species. Bristly golden aster, goldenrod, seaside daisy on the lower left here. I love for being kind of ever blooming. I've seen it like at golf courses and stuff, just very low maintenance. Phacelia is really beautiful, comes in a lot of different types. Primrose, I'll warn you, that can take off in your garden. The bush sunflower is really beautiful. And don't shy away from thistles. You might have a place in your garden where you actually don't want dogs or cats bothering you. Well, plant a couple thistles. The bees, I love to watch them get down. I actually took this picture on the lower right. This bee is rummaging around inside this thistle, and it's just so entertaining to watch. And it's really easy to grow from seed. So, and here are the plants for sun. And I'm going to click kind of quickly through some of them. The manzanita at the top, they're wide variety. You can have ground cover manzanitas, trees, you can have shrubs. Most often it's a shrub. Elderberry, I'm growing a lot of that in my yard. I want a fast screen across the back of my yard where my neighbors cut down all of their trees across the creek from me. So that's a really nice one. And it is a bird riot. When those berries ripen, the birds are all over it, but when it blooms, the pollinators are all over it. We have a native cherry. The cherry itself you can make jam out of it, but it's mostly pit. But again, it's a great pollinator plant, and it's really popular with the birds. Along the top here, we have two types of toyon. That's a really easy to grow plant, and it's red. There's red or yellow, but I prefer the red one, and so do the birds. Below that is the manzanita, and to the right of it is sage. You can get a little sage that's, maybe $5 or $10 and put it in the ground, and it will spread, 8 feet by 3 feet or whatever. It will get very, very large, very quickly and inexpensively. We have ceanothus along the top. This is California lilac. Like the manzanita, it comes in many different forms. So I'm growing some as a ground cover. I'm growing some as a small tree. I have a little hedge area I'm growing with ceanothus. It's gorgeous, for one thing, and the pollinators flock to it. And it blooms like this time of year and a little bit before. It's kind of an early bloomer. Down below, we have coyote brush. You see this driving along the freeway. It's indestructible, but it's also a really popular bird nesting plant. And so you can grow that as a low form or as a little shrub like that, evergreen, no water, no attention, nothing. You can just plant it. I love including these buckwheats because this is a plant I hadn't heard about before. The top pink flower, the one to the right that's kind of pinkish white, and this fluorescent yellow, those are all California buckwheats. And one pollinator garden creator said it's like a disco on a Saturday night. Those things are covered in pollinators. I threw lupin in here as well on the lower right. That's another really easy to grow perennial that's really gorgeous. And there's several different varieties. So you can grow lupin that might bloom early, mid, late. You can get some bloom in your garden. And then there's annuals. Annuals are so easy because you just throw the seeds out there and they come up. That's a Bollander's sunflower on the upper left, really beautiful native sunflower. Below, my grandson, I have to throw in a pitch for getting kids involved. I handed my 13-year-old grandson a camera, and he's been taking pictures. He took the picture of the poppies. He took the picture of the, I believe he took the picture of he's taken other pictures of the California fuchsia. Someone else took the tidy tips. Get a kid out there with a camera. Maybe it's their 4th grade or 5th grade or whatever science project. He just did a big presentation for 8th grade on native plants. But they get really interested in what's going on in the garden. It takes them off of their phones. Those were all sun lovers. These are the shade lovers. Don't be afraid to garden in the shade. I have an oak tree that used to just have rocks under it when I bought the house, and I didn't know any better and left the rocks in the lawn. And then I started growing some of these shade plants under it, and it looks fantastic. And the hummingbird comes through and nectars on everything, and the bees of different sizes are using everything. Little tiny flies are visiting some of the flowers. So don't hesitate to garden in the shade. We have on the upper left, sticky monkey flower, easy peasy to grow, really great, beautiful plant. To the right is cream bush with beautiful cascading white flowers. Lower left is a type of native currant. And the currants, there's several different varieties, and there's also gooseberries, which I'll talk about in a second. Beautiful, really like late winter flowers. When nothing else is blooming, this pink in your garden just cascading down in a beautiful form, and then the manzanita about the same time makes a really nice kind of late winter bloom. And to the right, following it, is the fuchsia flower gooseberry. This is a beautiful plant with like these arching branches with these beautiful flowers. And if you look closely in the upper right, you'll see a very long thorn. This is a very thorny plant. If you have cats getting near your bird bath, if you have somebody trampling your garden you don't want, if somebody's dog is pooping on your parking strip, well, maybe not a parking strip. You don't want to get those thorns too close to people's ankles, but it's a great deterrent plant. And I know a woman who runs a pollinator garden who's done exactly that. She had workmen trampling through a certain part of her garden, and they don't trample anymore because she's got that growing. So anyway, and here are some more shade lovers. Upper left's coffeeberry. It's called coffeeberry because the early explorers thought it looked like coffee in South America. It's actually not. It's a laxative. And so they discovered pretty quickly it's not coffee. Don't eat it. To the right are huckleberries, which are really tasty, but they like that moist kind of shady area that I don't have in my garden. So, plant that if you have that type of environment. Lower left is Nevin's barberry, which is very rare in nature now. But the nursery trades picked it up, and it's a beautiful summer berry. And beautiful. Right now it's blooming with really pretty yellow flowers. And then to the right of it is its cousin, the Oregon grape. Those are two that are related. And they have those kind of stickery leaves. Those don't really bother me. And frankly, with native plants, you're not out there fussing with them too much. So I might weed underneath these plants once a year when I'm on the garden tour. But I'm generally letting nature go and having maybe some bark underneath them to keep weeds at bay. But anyway, don't be afraid of the stickery plants. Some more, this is my favorite, hands down, ground cover, the woodland strawberry in the upper left. That's great in shade. There's another variety for sun, the beach strawberry for sun. To the right is another kind of manzanita that's called kinnikinnick. That's just a ground cover, and that can grow in shade. It's one of the few manzanitas that does well in shade. To the left, lower left, is yerba buena, and that's what San Francisco was originally named for. It means good herb, and it's like a mint. I know somebody who makes mojitos with it, so it's a very nice, it doesn't go crazy spreading, at least not in my garden, but it's a really beautiful, lush green plant. And then to the right is yarrow, which you get some really nice, beautiful white flowers from. But some people grow it as a ground cover instead of a lawn, so that's an option. Other shade lovers, we have a native honeysuckle. Don't grow the invasive imported one because it will take off and get into the wild. And then this really strange looking plant on the bottom is Dutchman's pipe. And it's the only plant that hosts the pipevine swallowtail butterfly, a beautiful iridescent blue butterfly that is becoming more and more rare. So more and more people are trying to grow that and bring back those populations. Here's a couple of perennials for shade. In the upper left, we have asters that are growing really well in my garden. Below that is hummingbird sage, an unusual sage that will grow in shade. Most sage like sun. Upper right is something called bee plant. It's so innocuous. It is not a very human-centered plant. It doesn't attract our type of aesthetic. But the hummingbirds and the bees love that plant more than anything else in my garden. Those little tiny flowers must taste like, I don't know, jujubes or something. They really get in there and love those flowers. And the lower right is goldenrod. And the asters and the goldenrod are actually really popular nectar plants for monarch butterflies. In the shade too, here are some annuals that you can grow from seed pretty easily. One mistake that I made was I had some bark and I just threw the seeds down and they went down into the bark and they didn't get enough sunlight and they didn't bloom. So you have to kind of clear some bare land when it's going to rain, probably November, get your annual seeds down and you can have some really beautiful pops of color. And then don't forget about grasses. This is actually at the Woodside Library Garden in the back. They have some beautiful Mendocino reedgrass you can see the beautiful fronds of it here, interplanted with yarrow that I mentioned has the white flowers. So in the shade, you can create some really nice vignettes like this. And then don't forget about nuts. Even though I said these don't benefit pollinators like bees, these plants are gonna benefit the Lepidoptera, the different butterflies and moths that eat the leaves at the caterpillar stage, and then they'll also all benefit birds and humans. I mean, you can eat the hazelnuts or process the acorns yourself. I haven't tried that. I throw this in because a lot of people have been trying to do more gardening for monarchs, and there's a whole list of different plants for different times of the year at this link from Xerces Society, which is about insect preservation. But there's several other really interesting handouts I included here, and I really recommend checking out their site and learning more. And then thinking about your own garden, thinking about where's the sun, where's the shade, sketch it out. This isn't what my sketch looked like, but I like to show a nice professional looking one. And then check out some books. I brought some books with me, and actually it was recommended that I could just hand them around for you guys to take turns looking at. But I think I'm gonna keep most of them up here and just pass around. Sorry, this one's the most relevant. Designing the California Native Garden talks about the different types of areas in California, but also I found within my own garden. So I don't know. I know it's kind of a heavy thing to pass around, but all of these books, and one of them I know is supposed to be raffled off today, the Wildlife Habitat Garden, and that can show you some different examples and some different ways to garden that will hopefully inspire you to try some of these plants yourself. And this is, I put this in here not because we're going to read the whole thing, but it gives you an idea of if there's some fallen logs or if somebody's cutting down a tree in your neighborhood, and especially if it's like an oak, just put something in the corner of your garden for things to nest in and grow around and grow under. Leave things a little bit messy. Leave the leaves on the ground. Let things kind of foment under there. There's so much under my oak leaves going on right now. The birds are digging around and eating some of the caterpillar chrysalises that are under there. They buried some acorns. They're digging them up. So let it be a little bit messy. And the poster here also emphasizes planting natives. And it looks like this. Here's the buckwheat. Here's one of the asters I mentioned. There's the manzanita. There's a little bird bath. Plant in layers so that you have places for the wildlife to move through and so that you can see it. The window over there is actually looking out at the bird bath, and there's a little chair in the corner where they can see the wildlife. This is another garden where you're going to do very little weeding in a garden like this because all these plants are crowding out the weeds, and they're blooming at different times of the year. So you have a sage up there in the upper left, the red bud tree to the right. You have the a verbena in the lower right. Poppies are just starting. But then these other plants in the foreground are buckwheats that are going to bloom a little bit later and go into summer. So there's a buckwheat in the foreground that's blooming right now. So what happens when you put all of this together is you wind up with a garden that's just exploding with life. Our garden, we had a box hedge, a lawn, and some imported shrubs up against our house, which is really dangerous. And we took all that out and we were growing all natives. And we have seen so much, all of these things are in our garden now. All of these, the hummingbirds are coming through. We have all the nesting birds. We have this little butterfly landed in our garden on some of our sage seeds. A male monarch in the lower right landed in our garden on the not native lavender. So go figure, I'm not 100%, but you'll get that diversity and you'll save water because the lower two lines are the blue line is our natural weather pattern in California of rain in like November into January, February. And you can see the green is our native plants mapping to that. The yellow are quote Mediterranean plants from places like Sydney, Australia, where my brother lives, and other places that are considered Mediterranean, but aren't summer dry. And so you need to water those in the summer, which could kill some of the native plants. I'd say if you're going to grow both, do them in separate areas and cost money. So I don't actually waste money on that, or that orange line is lawn. That's the most wasteful of all. And I was shocked to learn we have 40 million acres of lawn in America. It's the biggest crop that we have, and it doesn't feed the insects and it doesn't feed the people. So we were just happy to tear ours out. So anyway, it really is easy. I include some resources here. So if you're thinking of growing native plants, go to calscape.org, put in your zip code, and you can see what grows naturally where you are. iNaturalist, if you get excited as I did, I got my camera out, started taking pictures of bugs and different things. You can post it on iNaturalist. On the left are the things that I've posted that I found that I'm tracking. The algorithm tells you what they think it is, and then actual people who are experts in these areas weigh in. And once you have like 3 sort of votes, then it becomes research grade. So it's kind of an interesting way to learn, and it's very, I'd say, well done by these Berkeley grad students who created originally, and it's very scientifically oriented. And then on the right are other people's pictures that are, if you set it to a certain license, you can just use those pictures for talks like this. And so there's this great image sharing with different licensing. So I find it fabulous. And they have citizen science projects, so you can even get involved with the project. This does not have anything to do with pollinators, except the birds eat them. But this Merlin app is really awesome. So if you don't have it, I really recommend. It's from Cornell University. Download it. We used to listen in our yard and we'd hear like 3 or 4 different birds at a time. The other day we turned it on and we were up to 16. So we're hearing way more bird diversity. What I love about the app is it shows this little pattern of the birds up above, but below where it says the matches, they actually illuminate in yellow with each chirp. So you can hear which bird's making what sound when. Awesome. It's really amazing. And then explore these websites. The California Native Plant Society, I'm a member. I run a program there for wildflower ambassadors, evangelizing natives, but they are a really great resource. And they have chapters throughout California, wherever you live. We also have something that's a Bay Area regional focus that is called the Native Plant Resource Teams. So if you just Google that term, you'll come up with us. There's no fee to join this one, but it's just getting people knit together around the region to go on field trips or share ideas or help each other out. So this shows a field trip. We went to Larner Seeds, which you might have guessed, I really love Larner Seeds. And so we got to go up to Bolinas and have breakfast and go out and see them and go to a nursery. So there's just fun stuff to do. And then, I encourage you to learn more. Go on a tour. I want to mention down here, about 2/3 down the page, Bringing Back the Natives Garden Tour is this coming weekend. If you're not doing anything, it's free. You just go online to bringingbackthenatives.net. You can sign up, you get a map of the addresses, and it's kind of a self-guided tour. And you can preview the gardens. The middle garden here, that used to be lawn and box hedge, that is my garden. And I have a little courtyard with some little chairs. I have moon globe poppies. They're all native plants planted now. And it's just so abuzz with life. We love it there. And also encourage others. My grandson, Trey, I drag my grandsons to the nurseries. They help to plant the plants. They take pictures of the insects. Get them, they talk about nature deficit disorder. We all are suffering from it. So get them outside, give a talk yourself, invite people to come see your garden. Just do what you can to get others involved. Don't read this. It's way too many resources, but this is the roadmap for me. When I first started with this, I didn't know where to begin. And we are in one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, so it can be overwhelming. But I found that the resources I found, the different talks that I attended, and then in the middle where it says prioritize keystone plants, I was asked to create some signs and 2 talks for the Bringing Back the Natives Garden Tour, the one that's coming up next weekend. And I put those in there because it talks about that shade and sun. And if you just plant those things, you're going to see a big difference. So anyway, that's resources. And just as a final thought, this is a way for us to be more compassionate to the world and all the creatures in it. It takes us out of just our human way of thinking and really connects us with nature. So hope that you've found some inspiration here today. And the QR code for all the slides is here. I believe they'll be sent around, but I have 12 minutes for questions instead of 15. So
do you have any, I guess, just thoughts to empower renters? We don't really have a lot of control over
pots.
Yeah, pots and
tall pots.
Tall pots, yeah, because rats. And
roots. So one thing I should have, there was so much to cover. I wanted to say so much more, but when you think about a native plant, you think about a toyon or even some of the grasses, think about their roots as going up to this ceiling. So, some things will do fine in a pot. My manzanitas are doing great in a pot with very little care. But they need I have pots that are about waist high on me, or a little bit shorter, but they're tall and narrow, but that really helps the roots.
Okay. What about soil prep? What do you have to do to get really neglected?
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Most native plants. So if you think about California is so diverse. There's areas where there's creeks and there's silt and there's, but mostly you're gardening probably in clay or you're gardening in not very fertile soil. And that's what they co-evolved with. And so if we start adding compost, we start adding a lot of nutrients to the soil, then what we tend to grow is weeds. And again, I'm a lazy gardener, so I don't like weeding. So we just went with native soil. We had to build up our soil because it was flat. We wanted some berms. And so we went to Linkso over near us in San Carlos is a great source for rocks or gravel or whatever. And we actually got it's called essential soil, but it's not super nutritious. And we built up our berms with that. And we put down bark. And then we used to have a gardener who would take all of our oak leaves and he would fill his truck multiple times and he'd take them to the dump to create methane. And what we didn't know was there were galls on those leaves that were little insects that feed birds. There were chrysalises of different types of Lepidoptera. I mean, I feel like I'm atoning now for my sins because from 2007 to 2020, that's how we were gardening. And then we heard the talk by Doug Tallamy, and the light bulb went off for us. And we we're starting all sorts of English garden plants, and we threw them all away, and we started with natives, and we haven't looked back. And my husband actually put 2 hammocks up in the backyard, because that's how much we are not having to work in the garden, but we can enjoy it. There's lots of life around us. So yeah, that was a long way to answer your question, but I'm also happy, my information's on here. I'm happy to, follow up if you have questions or want more. I know, right? It's a learning journey. You have to look at it like a journey. You have a question.
Yeah, so there's a question from our online audience. Someone is wondering, they have a bee house or hotel, which is about 2 years old.
Yeah.
It's pretty weathered, and the rooms have shrunk, so they used to fit together more tightly.
Oh.
How often do you recommend replacing a bee house, and should it be more sheltered from weather?
Yes. I show a bee house on here, but I actually haven't used them myself. We put one up in our yard. It didn't really get used. What's getting used is the bare dirt. I like to use a lot of mulch, but I leave bare areas. The bare dirt, wood, sometimes people will leave stems. I left some stems from I cut some sunflowers. I just left the stems because some bees will nest in that. Leaving the environment, I find, is easier than trying to maintain the house. I do know, they should Google around. There's different bee house companies. What looks most efficient to me is the type of bee house where they have, you can take out the actual layers of it. You're supposed to clean it. You're supposed to collect them, the little baby bees, to protect them from predators. There's a lot that you can do to be high maintenance with it. I kind of just let it rip with nature. And I'm the same way with hummingbirds. I used to have a hummingbird feeder. I didn't know you're supposed to clean them out every 3 days when it's hot out. And I go on vacation. I don't clean something out every 3 days, but I grow those California. They get about this high, and they're covered in these orange flowers, and the hummingbirds are all over them. I just try to grow a lot of the flowers and the bugs, especially. I saw hummingbirds very quietly in my little cafe area by my oak tree, and a hummingbird came by. What it was doing to an oak tree was flicking its tongue out. And I moved around so it was a silhouette, and I could see little gnats, and it was catching gnats, and they go over webs, and they pull out bits of dead insects to eat. So I wish I had more advice about bee houses. Yeah. Any other questions online?
We do have a couple more, but so really quickly, you did talk a little bit about soil, but as far as which type of mulch provides for better spreading of plants and infill growth?
My style of gardening is very low maintenance, and so I put in lots of evergreen backbone, and I put some perennials in between, but I've mostly put mulch, fir, small bark mulch over that. That's what they use at the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden in Palo Alto and everything. And so I don't, as far as things, strawberries are growing over and around it, and the yerba buena is kind of growing over and around it. But I haven't done a whole lot of plants that are doing the infilling. I'm not sure. Garden I showed where everything was kind of mounded. Those types of plants, like the sage, my sage is totally happy with sending its branches up and mounding over, and a lot of the plants will do that. So even if you put fine fir bark like I have down, and it holds in moisture. So there's some controversy over, is that a fire hazard? Well, not if it's keeping moisture in. So, maybe it's a matter of amount. Not sure. There was a question in the back.
Hi. We converted our lawn to California natives this past summer. I feel like right now I'm kind of struggling with figuring out how. I've watched a lot of the bringing back the native tours on how
Good.
pruning back kind of specifically manzanitas or ceanotheses. But I feel like the part I'm struggling with right now is in that curve where their water needs are still above what California has.
Right.
How do you kind of balance that, especially with something like a manzanita that will get a little bit finicky if
Yes.
it's too much water?
Oh, no, God.
And then I really wanted to ask about the fir bark. Is it a 1/4 inch fir bark? We have a half that we've been using.
Oh, I think it's a little bit bigger. I think it's a little bit bigger. And you can either take my info off of the seeds or off here and ping me, and I can actually go take a picture of it, because I know it's like small fir bark from Lynxo, but I don't know the dimensions very, very well. The other thing I'll add is we got excited, thank God, in the winter, and we went native with the rains. And so a lot of our stuff got established with the rains. And that's really ideal because when you start planting in the spring and summer, that's actually the dormant season. That's like in Michigan, if people ran out and started planting right before the snow, it's like, ooh, why don't you wait till the natural season for Michigan, which is kind of the opposite of us, or Europe? Like we have such a different environment than that part of the country. So yeah, planting, ideally, this is the time to plan. And you can plant some natives now, like these seeds will be fine in a pot or in a watered corner of your yard because they're perennials. The annuals might not do as well, but for really getting things established, just plan now and then be all ready in October, and then November, like start digging, get your stuff in. Yeah. Oh, call East Bay Wilds. He's the manzanita. People use the manzanita man. You will know I killed a manzanita by planting it in April and watering it, and it caught some kind of like pathogen from the soil, and it turned black. And manzanitas grow slowly, so we bought a big one because we were kind of showing off before the garden tour, and we had an empty spot. It was a $150 mistake. Most native plants are like $15 to $20. I'll add. It's like not. And the other thing is, if you kill a plant, a less expensive plant, I look at it like I used to always get cut flowers, and I don't go to the store and get cut flowers anymore. I use that part of my budget to get an actual plant. So it's like, oh, $30 worth of, those flowers would be cascading. In yourself, or just try something different. Other questions or? Online.
Right.
Lisa, you have so many questions.
I know. Another online question from earlier in your talk, though. So it might have already been covered, but do berries or ginberries occur locally at all?
Oh, there is a local service berry. Sounds familiar, and I would go to calscape.org and put in my zip code to figure out if it's local to me. But I also wouldn't get too hung up on that. I think that, I have a sage in my yard that's not native to San Carlos, but the bees are using it and it's really great. And some Lepidoptera can eat it, even though it's not like traditionally right in my neighborhood. So I'm kind of a hybrid. And I also, one thing I appreciate about Doug telling me is he says, plant 70% natives. If you want to keep your mother's rose, if you want to have your vegetables, like grow your own, do your own thing. You don't have to be, some people are so like, I don't know, just like they beat you over the head with it. Grow your own stuff, but have the native plants there to try to build back this biodiversity. And the reason he says 70% is kind of that balance point where we will bring back some of those diminishing populations will start to rebound at that 70% native rate. So, yeah. Others? Oh, we're like right on time.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I want to thank you all for coming, and also for those who joined us online. I know there was a lot of information that was shared. As was asked, all these slides will be shared after the presentation, so you can click on all the resources and go to all the links that Jennifer has shared with us. And then also, for those both in person here and online, there will be a random drawing for the California Wildlife Habitat Garden. So check your emails the next day, and you might be one of the lucky winners to get the book. And then also, if you did not already get the seed packets, thank you so much, Jennifer, for the seed packets. Be sure to grab some on your way out. So thank you all for coming, and have a great day.